intersect with religion and culture. Bill Moyers, as you know, I won't spend too much time introducing him. He's a broadcast journalist, has done hundreds of specials on all aspects of culture and society. But in particular, he's had such a rich understanding and captured such a rich tradition of religions in America. He has a seminary degree and actually is ordained as a minister, although he says he hasn't practiced as a pastor in a church. He's worked with students and others in church work. Of course, he's also been a leader in the Peace Corps, served as special assistant to President Johnson, and then since then has had a distinguished career in journalism. He said he's a student of so many areas of culture and society. He's also an expert on a lot of them. He said that being a journalist is like being a kid, that you can continue to work on lots of different areas and not have to specialize in one thing, but you specialize in many things. Ron Thiemann was here a couple weeks ago and talked about the public intellectual as connected critic. I can think of no better example for those of you who said, who's Thiemann talking about when he says we should be connected critics? I can think of no better example than Bill Moyers, someone who uses the tools of his craft, in his case, the tools of his crafts, to be a commentator and a critic and an engaged citizen. So it's great to have you here, Mr. Moyers, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me, for giving me this chance to, I'm sure, the resistance of your students to interrupt your usually inspired lectures and to preempt your class. I'm really glad to be here. And what I want to do is to take your questions to address what's on your mind, not what's on mine. I would like to say one thing that just occurred to me looking around this room. 46 years ago, 44 years ago, I was where you are, in a class at the University of Texas. And it just struck me, looking at you, that I would never, in 1956, have imagined the world that we are a part of today. 44 years from now, in your life, when you're my age, will be 2044. And I'm wondering if you ever try to imagine what the world will be like in 2044, just as I did not imagine in 1956 what the world would be like in the year 2000. I mean, in 1956, when I was your age, there was no environmental movement. There was no women's movement. And today, there are more women in colleges and universities than there are men. Big story yesterday's New York Times about that and what it means societally. There was no civil rights movement in 1956. We could not imagine an end to segregation, to the coerced discrimination, legitimate, illegal discrimination of people. We couldn't imagine an end to the Cold War. We had just been in high school where we were given lessons. I mean, we were given a training at the beginning of every September in what to do in case of a nuclear attack. Go under your desk or go down to the basement. There was no computer and the internet in 1956. There was no interstate highway system in 1956. There was no Peace Corps, no Medicare. I could never in my life at your age have imagined the world I'm occupying today. And as I look back over that, I say, what was it? Since I had no prophetic vision, since I couldn't anticipate what was going to happen, what was it that has enabled me, as a very fortunate individual, to lead such an interesting life and to negotiate myself through all of these changes that have occurred in my own life, as well as in the society in which I'm a part. And as I was just thinking about that, looking around this room, and imagining your world in 2044, as I did not imagine my world in 2000 from 1956, I think it was the fact that somewhere along the way, my teachers in both high school and college said, look at life as a continuing course in adult education. Never tire of learning. Never close your mind. Never close off yourself from the processing of information into knowledge and the processing of knowledge into hopefully wisdom. I think it was just simply I learned, thanks to a succession of wonderful teachers from the 10th grade in high school through my senior year in college, who just kept us reading, kept us listening, kept us open to people and the world around us. Because I've been through 4 or 5 careers in my life. I'm told that you're going to have to go through 7 to 9 careers in your life, 7 to 9 different kinds of jobs. And I'm no more virtuous, no more intelligent, no more, I'm just more fortunate than some people. But to have been able to negotiate the changes in society and in my life, I attribute to classes like this when I was back in college that introduced me to the varieties of human experience. And the variety, I was fortunate to be Texas. We had a very large population of Arab Americans who came to the University of Texas for petroleum engineering. And Texas is a great oil and gas state, and Arab and Saudi Arabia was too. And I was introduced there to people from a large community of people from another part of the world, and that triggered a lot of my interest. But I guess that's the only advice I would give you this morning is consider this class and classes like it merely the beginning of your education, not the end of it. So that by the year 2044, when you're 65 years old, you'll still think of yourself, as I have been fortunate to do, as a student in the world. And every morning and every experience actually excites me at my age because of the possibilities of learning something I don't know and therefore reinventing myself through what I learned to cope with the world that has changed overnight. Those thoughts just occurred to me looking around and seeing myself and my wife. We married that year, and we married actually as juniors in college in 1954. And she, some of you remind me of her, and some of you remind me of me. And the other thing I would say is how swiftly passes like a bullet the time between now and then. I just cannot, I know that's not like an old man talking, but it really does pass. And seize every moment. Don't defer any of your enthusiasms. Seize every moment and drink it as if it were the last glass of water you're going to drink, because it passes very, very swiftly. I know this class passes slowly, but I can assure you that life does not. You'll be 65, looking back sooner than you think. The great wonder of life is that at 65, you'll live even longer than my actuarial rate is probably 80. Your actuarial rate, your longevity will be much beyond that. My 3 children who are 40, 37, and 34 are likely to live 10 years longer than I do. You have a long life. The unfortunate thing is like a speeding train. So, this is the beginning. Anyway, let's talk about what's on your mind.
Thanks. In the current scene in the 90s especially, we've seen that religion is more on the agenda than it was before. Religion in public life. And as you know, the course is really about how leaders and followers draw on their religious values, not just in their religious congregations or in their private lives, but in public, interacting with people from different religions. One way we start class is that we invite students to bring in articles from the newspapers that treat religion in different aspects of public life. And that way students bring in those experiences of what's going on today and see the relevance for what we're doing in the class. So I wonder if any of you brought in articles today to cover. Kelly, would you start us off?
Sure. I have an article about a man who had pleaded guilty in 1990 to his 3rd alcohol-related driving offense in just over a year. And so he, on the advice of his lawyer, began attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And the Supreme Court just ruled the other day that he would have to continue going to the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, but that government officials would have to pay him a $1 symbolic pay for going, because he's now not wanting to go to these meetings anymore because of the man happens to be an atheist, and because of the references to prayer and to God, and in the meetings turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. So he went to the court requesting that he not have to go to these Alcoholics Anonymous meetings anymore. And again, like I said, the government has to pay a symbolic $1 payment to him so that he continues going to those meetings as part of his sentence.
Great. Would you like to comment on the case or what issues it raises?
I've been following that for a number of reasons, because I'm interested in issues of church and state, and also because I have a son, my oldest son is 40, who never drank until he was actually or took drugs until he was a junior in college, and he became an addict and an alcoholic. Although he didn't crash until he was 30 years old, he managed to cope during that period in ways that I can't imagine, because he was using very heavily. And he crashed at the age of 30. He had 3 relapses. We almost lost him several times. But he came through, and he's now, in fact, vice president of the rehabilitation center, Hazelden, the big rehabilitation center in Minnesota, where he began his treatment. And we did a series, he and I collaborated last year on a series of public broadcasting called Close to Home, Addiction and Recovery in America, looking at issues of addiction. He will tell you, if he were here, that he would not be alive today if it were not for God, for what alcoholics in AA call higher power, higher power, that it is his religious and spiritual sustenance that has enabled him to cope with the chemical changes in his brain that brought on by addiction. But I've heard him sit in meetings like this with other people who object very strongly, who are recovering alcoholics and addicts, who are surviving without any reference to God, without any reference to a spiritual power. And they say, look, my son, we're here, we've made it. We don't want to have to use the God language in order to survive as alcoholics. And it's all built around this case because AA wants to be in every prison and every jail. I think where I come out is that, as I said last night in the lecture, if it works for you, fine, but if it doesn't work for you, you can't impose it on anybody else. And I think the effort of the government through the penal system to impose one form of recovery on inmates is a mistake, because while many do, not everyone responds to the spiritual and religious language, imagery, and passion that others do. So I think I'm on the side of the inmate who says, I don't want to go.
Thanks, Kelly. Ginger, mentality.
This is from the newspaper, and on Sunday, November the 14th, over 2,000 delegates met in Geneva for what's called the World Council of Families 2, and the purpose was to discuss and affirm the natural family as the fundamental social unit. And the conference united fundamental Christians and fundamentalist Muslims. And the first line of the article said, there was once a time when dialogue between religions had a goal of international peace. In the past decade, however, a new and potentially dangerous form of interfaith collaboration has emerged. And the two fundamentalist groups, they reject the separation between church and state and are committed to imposing their views through political means. And I thought this paralleled a little bit what you talked about last night about the dividing side of religion as opposed to the unity.
I haven't seen that story. Is it a clipping that you have?
It's in the Guardian, and which is a newspaper in London.
Yeah, very good newspaper too. And they do a lot of coverage of international religion. That's a very good newspaper. Well, that's a case of like finding like, of fundamentalists in this country and other countries getting together because they all share an absolutist idea about religion and about God, and they are uncomfortable in the presence of relativists like me or liberals like me. They were being open of any other opinions. And of course, this is my big quarrel with fundamentalists in this country and elsewhere. It's Muslim fundamentalists or Protestant fundamentalists in this country, is that I don't think you can use the power of the government, the state, to coerce belief. That, as Joseph Campbell said to me in that interview, a series of interviews I did with him, which might be worth showing sometime, the parts of it in class. I believe even preachers make a mistake. He said when they try to compel or argue belief, that they should let the inner radiance of their own lives be what touches and reaches other people. But I think the most dangerous thing in the world is the power of the state, which is the power to tax, the power to kill, capital punishment, the power to draft and send you to war. You should not use the power of the state to require people to pay taxes to what they don't support religiously, or to believe, or to try to believe as they don't believe. And that's why the great danger I see in fundamentalism is when it links up to the power of the state, which is back to the power of the army and of the law to interfere in matters of conscience.
Mina, you brought in a story I know about compulsion and conscience as well, and we'll pick up Tom. But it seems to tie, it's not about fundamentalism, but it's about authority within the church trying to limit one group and another. So could you do your case?
Yeah, sure. This was in yesterday's New York Times website, and the title of the article is Catholic Bishops to Require Certification for Theologians. And the Roman Catholic bishops voted on Wednesday at a meeting of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops to require all theology professors at Catholic colleges and universities to obtain a certification from the bishop declaring what they teach is authentic Catholic doctrine. And one of the reasons why they passed this is because they want to retain Catholic identity, and that's what else interesting. It ties into many issues that we talked about in the past.
Do you care to comment on how that may or may not be different from what's happened in the Southern Baptist Church? The bishops saying that in order to teach theology to Catholic university, you have to receive a mandate from your bishop.
Well, I have had ambivalent responses to what's happening in the Catholic Church. I admire Catholicism for trying to make doctrine important, for trying to keep its tradition unique to its universities and colleges. Now, I quarrel with its tradition. I think a religion that is based essentially on a male hierarchy is a religion that's truly out of touch with our human natures. And I thought they are fighting reality, even as they try to shape their doctrine to keep their church unique. So I salute their efforts to make sure that if you go to a Catholic school, you are introduced to Catholic values, and Catholic values are maintained there. Otherwise, why be a Catholic school? At the same time, I've been troubled by my own former convention, the Southern Baptist Convention, to impose upon all of its ministers, its pastors, a conformity or orthodoxy, because they too want to maintain what their vision of Baptist values are. So I've been ambivalent. I've fought myself over this issue. How can I admire Catholics for trying to keep their beliefs intact and embodied and incarnated in their educational institutions, while at the same time resisting my own denomination for wanting to do the same thing without the formal structure. But then I realized I'm a Baptist, not a Catholic, because I believe in the individual conscience. We Baptists believe in the priesthood, quote, of the believer, that we interpret the Bible for ourselves and work out our relationship with God as we define God. So that's why I'm a Baptist and not a Catholic. I think Catholics have to make Catholicism would become the most influential worldwide religion if they ever open themselves to utilizing the power and intelligence and passion of women in the ministry. But I'm not a Catholic, which is why they don't listen to me. But that, to me, is a great mistake to make. So I salute their effort to keep their institutions Catholic, but I'm troubled by their exclusive characteristics.
Tom, you brought a case.
Yep. We talk a lot about in our class about prayer in school, and recently, actually on Monday, the Supreme Court upheld a Texas ruling not to allow there to be prayer at football games. They didn't discuss prayer in graduation ceremonies, but I mean, there's a lot of debate in Texas over whether it should be, whether it shouldn't be. Any people have been sneaking onto the fields to give their messages, and a lot of people are saying that it's part of good sportsmanship and for student safety. And I was wondering what your opinion on that is.
I'm opposed to forms of public religion like that means nothing, frankly. I mean, if you can't give a prayer that is authentically expressing your own belief, what is the value of it? I mean, if it's so general as to be addressed to the universe and not to your notion of God, what's the value of it? If you make it a denominational or a parochial prayer, then you're asking the people in that audience who are not adherents of your faith to either tacitly or hypocritically pretend that they share that view. You can't outlaw prayer. It's a private matter. Prayer is a personal matter. Prayer is a matter between you and your Creator, between your God. You can never outlaw that. You can pray in class all you want to. You just can't do it publicly because everybody else in here might not agree with your idea of God. I think that separation is a marvelous contribution that American democracy has made to the world. It has freed religion from coercion, and it has freed us from the kind of vacuous, meaningless tributes to religion that have no effect on us personally. I mean, you go to England, where prayer, religion, public, Anglican church, and 5% of the population attends church. Religion loses its dynamism the more ambiguous and general it becomes. So it's a meaningless exercise in my experience. But don't take I'm not the last word on it. What do you think?
I don't know, personally, if this prayer is more in terms of, for school, for the safety of other students, if they're praying for, nobody to have to be hauled away in a hospital, go to the hospital today, I'm all for it. I mean, if they're praying for good sports, fine. But I don't think they should be imposing their values. I mean, if they're sort of praying for almost humanism or praying just for the good of everybody else, I'm all for it. Otherwise, I'm not sure if they should be imposing their values on all the other people in the stadium.
But the fact that there is no public prayer at that football game does not keep me from praying that nobody there, including those inebriated, will be involved in an accident when he goes home. That's the issue. See, there's no way the authorities can keep any of us from praying. But by requiring any form of public prayer in purpose, we're requiring people who don't believe to engage to either be quiet about their beliefs or to be hypocritical. Look, 1 out of 5 people in this country does not believe in God. That freedom of conscience is as important to them as my freedom of conscience to believe in God. So nobody loses when you don't have a public prayer. But somebody always loses when you do. I mean, if you pray right now, I know nothing about your religion, but if you ended it, if you're a Christian, you ended it in the name of Jesus Christ, there are going to be people around this table who just simply do not understand that and cannot accept that. Why should they be asked to engage in a hypocrisy or even a silent assent when it's not necessary for you to practice your faith to be able to utter those words in a public environment? You can say that even as I am talking. It's your conscience that is inviolate here. And therefore, by logic, everyone else's conscience as well. That is the essence of the whole notion of individual conscience in religion. And I'd like to come back to Kelly, what you heard my opinion. What do you think about the judge's ruling on that?
I would have to agree with you in terms of not imposing. I think there's a lot of different ways to address the problem, and imposing the one option of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the fact that the government needs to pay a symbolic $1 just to have that one individual go because his beliefs don't correspond with the beliefs of those who are attending the meetings. I would have to agree that that's not necessarily the best option. I think they might rather spend their money trying to find another way to address the issues of the people who wouldn't agree.
For one thing, you cannot ever treat someone for alcoholism who isn't ready to be treated. So if you make it voluntary, those people who have reached what we call the bottom, the people who are ready for it will go and are more likely to respond to it than if they're coerced and are sullen and rebellious as they sit there. You have to assent to the dynamics of Alcoholics Anonymous in order for that process to work. So to be dragged in there, I mean, when my son did not want to go to treatment, and we took him against his will, you know, he relapsed twice. But when he finally, as a 36-year-old man with 2 children, hit bottom, wound up in a crack house, was close to dying, he came out of there and said, I got to get help. We could never have coerced him into getting that treatment. He had to be ready to get it himself, and then he responded. And I think the same applies. Make it voluntary. If you want to go to AA, if you're an inmate and want to go to AA, you go. If you don't go. There's nothing, it doesn't seem to be anything lost there.
We could take one more article if there is, and then we'll move on. Yep, Jerry.
It's actually from a magazine I was just reading yesterday. And because you talk about using the power of the state to promote beliefs is bad, and also, you know, religion having its dynamism as in being specific. And basically it talks about people smuggling. And it's
About what?
People smuggling.
People smuggling, right?
And it's at the St. Regis Mohawk Reservation. It's right on the border of Canada and the United States. And it's pretty obvious they basically smuggle people. And it says that because of its status as a tribal reserve, it makes it a no-go area for law enforcement officials, and even the military has declared it a red zone. So in this case, you have religion not allowing the power of the state to, I guess, use itself. So what would you think on those lines? And I guess the quote from one of the guys he's kind of the head of the smuggling, he says, well, to us, everybody's an alien, so they don't consider it breaking the law what they're doing, but it's still crossing over the boundaries of the United States and in their reservation. So I just want to know what you thought about that.
But is the no trespassing invoked for religious reasons, or is it invoked because the United States government recognizes the native tribe there as a sovereign nation that has control over its own territory the same way Mexico has over its territory, or Bermuda has over its territory? Isn't the no trespassing sign the result of a legal treaty, not a religious practice?
I don't know.
I think it
I'm
is.
asking you to clarify that point.
I don't think their objection is based upon theological or religious ground. The rejection of the opposition of some indigenous people to our drug laws is based upon a religious conviction that the use of, say, peyote in the case of the southwestern tribes is part of a sacred religious ritual, and therefore an effort to prescribe against using peyote is an offense to their religious tradition. But I don't think in this case, I live in New York and I've followed some of these cases up there, I think it's based upon a legal and political recognition of a sovereign right of the indigenous people to control the reservation, not on theological or religious grounds.
We took a pretty close look at the Smith case and the peyote, use of peyote,
Right.
and the jurisdiction on that. One point Jerry does raise, though, is for Native Americans, it's difficult to distinguish Native American identity from religion. In fact, we talk about how hard it is to maintain any distinction like religion as a personal matter as opposed to the public practice of a tribe or a reservation. So that does, at least when we looked at the peyote case, it raised lots of important issues about the integral role of religion in identity. I wanted to pose a question about the book that we've been reading recently and invite your perspectives, and then open it up for students to ask questions about this book or anything else about religion and values to you. We've looked at the way that Jimmy Carter drew upon his faith in private life and in public life, both as president and then after being a president with the Carter Center and Habitat for Humanity. We also, on the very first day of class, we looked at President Clinton's comments at the National Prayer Breakfast, asking for forgiveness after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, looking how he drew upon religious rhetoric to ask for forgiveness to the people, from the people and from Monica Lewinsky's family. My question is just a broad one about, do you think there is any appropriate way that a president can draw upon religious imagery or language from their particular tradition or others while they're president of the United States, or are the issues of separation between church and state too complex to draw on religious language at all? How would you do that appropriately?
I don't see how any of us can separate our moral, ethical, and spiritual religious values from our personalities, from our actions. We can make intelligent and successful efforts not to coerce other people into sharing those. But I am who I am. I'm the son of Ruby and Henry Moyers. I'm a product of Marshall High School. I'm a creature of the University of Texas. I am designed by made by my times that I lived through. I am deeply influenced by my Protestant Baptist background, but I'm shaped by all of the exposure I've had. In other words, sitting here before you, I am a particular person in a particular time. I'm not some engineered body that's going to do the right thing at the right time or do something that is separate from my whole life's experience. A president is the same way. If a president uses too much language about religion in the political process, he or she will probably be rejected. But it's unnatural to expect a president, Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had strong religious values. They just weren't Jimmy Carter's strong religious values. And Ronald Reagan was much better at expressing his than Jimmy Carter was. So I think it's impossible to quarantine the values that move you, that animate you, that have shaped you from your public persona if you're in politics. Now, politicians who use those in an effort to try to win votes, or a politician who believes he or she's on a missionary journey to convert you to those values, is, I think, open to opprobrium and probably rejection by the people. But when Bill Clinton gets up, I mean, Bill Clinton is a complex figure, affected deeply by his Southern roots, as well as by his Baptist background, as well as by the Pentecostal experience. I interviewed Bill Clinton when he was running for president, and he, both on the air and in private, told me about how after his defeat, he was governor for 2 years and he was defeated. And he said, you know, everybody wrote him off, everybody dismissed him, except for the Assembly of God folks in Arkansas. And he used to go to their church meetings, to their religious meetings, and they reached out to him, he said, you know, in his defeat, and embraced him and helped him. It would be impossible for Bill Clinton, in dealing with the Monica Lewinsky issue and the rejection by the public of his private behavior, it would be impossible for Bill Clinton not to ask forgiveness on religious grounds. But it also might be the case of somebody who was not affected by his or her Baptist, Pentecostal, Assembly of God, Christian orientation to ask forgiveness on other grounds. So I found Bill Clinton very authentic when he invoked religious language about forgiveness to explain where he was in the process of recovering from that scandal. But I would have found him inauthentic had he not used religious language.
Thanks. Let's open up for questions on Carter, on any of the issues we've looked at this semester, or from Mr. Moyers' speech last night.
Yes.
Mr. Moyers, we've been talking a lot in our class about Southern Baptists, especially when we watched your documentary, and the new movement to kind of put literal interpretation of the Bible and really move that into politics. And I was just wondering your beliefs on the interpretation of the Bible and how that fits with Southern Baptist theology, seeing as how Baptists are saying it's open to your own interpretation. And I was just wondering how you felt about taking the Bible literally as opposed to...
Well, when I was growing up, I was taught to take it literally, but as I began to think for myself and gather information and intelligence and ideas of the world at large, I realized that was a narrow, pinched, and unacceptable way to read the Bible. If I took the Bible literally on that one or two verses where it ostensibly refers, say, to homosexuality, I would have to take it literally a few verses later where it says you cannot touch the skin of a pig, and therefore we'd have to abolish football in America. I think when you start reading the Bible literally, you are misreading poetry. You're misreading literature, you're taking literally what they may have meant literally in that day, but which we can only interpret metaphorically. So I am opposed to taking the Bible literally. For one thing, it's impossible for me to contain my religious experience in the boundaries of that one text. There's so much more that enriches my life spiritually that I would hesitate to be bound only to the Bible, although the Bible was very important in forming my own religious agenda and my own religious values. But to take it literally could be interpreted to mean that none of you women could be here today, or that none of you women could be equal in your relationship with the person you love and marry. And I just don't believe that's true to human nature, nor is it true to my idea of God who understands human nature. So I quarrel all the time with people who take a literal interpretation of the Bible.
How then do you reconcile different, even opposing interpretations of the same text, the same Bible passages, or the Bible as a whole? We use it as an example in the civil rights movement here in America. Segregationists use the Bible to support their view, as well as the civil rights movement itself. So how do you reconcile the two opposing interpretations?
Well, I find that when the Bible speaks to universal issues, such as the Hebrew prophets spoke to the issue of justice, to the relationship of individuals to authority, to the corruption of power and authority, when it speaks to universal issues, it's like the Bhagavad Gita, that also speaks to universal issues. But when Hindu texts and Buddhist texts go into mere cultural, not mere, but go into particularly cultural interpretations, then they don't speak to me because they are fitted into a particular time, a particular place. The fact that two people look at the same text and take different interpretations from it goes to the nature of the human experience, where two people look at the same man or woman and one loves that person and falls in love with that person and the other doesn't. We are such individually crafted, individually created personas that the same religious text just cannot speak to all of us, except when it plumbs something that is true in the basic human experience, like the love of justice, the wrongness of inequality. Then I find the Bible is very powerful. And its use in the civil rights movement armed the civil rights activists with a moral agency that they would not have had otherwise in our culture. That same Bible, however, for 100 years, as you said, had been used to defend slavery. So you have to work very hard. There's nothing easy about any of this. You have to work very hard to separate your cultural inheritance and your cultural indoctrination from your ability to read, weigh, and assess for yourself what is truly important and critical in that text. It's hard work being it's hard work being a believer, it's hard work being a citizen, it's hard work being an informed person, but the reward is insight that you've never had without the effort. Yes?
At the end of your speech last night, you talked about different religious beliefs, but you can just still defend your own, but you can talk to people about that. And you said the key is listening. And I wanted to ask you, how can you be so firm in your faith and listen to someone else's, defend theirs just the same way, and not change who you are?
Well, Harold, that's a good question. I am changed by listening. I incorporate what seems to me, as I was just saying, to speak to me as well as it might speak to a Buddhist or a Hindu. I am changed, but I can be true to my own values, my own Christian story, because so much of my life has been shaped by that Christian story. by my Sunday school teachers, by my parents, by the deacons in that church, by my experience in the church services. When I was totally unaware of other religions and other cultures, I was deeply shaped by my emotional, psychological, and spiritual experiences as a young boy in the Central Baptist Church of Marshall, Texas. Those were for me at the time very real, powerful, and shaping experiences. They made me what I was at that time, and I still value them even these many years later. But I can look back on them with the experience of listening to other people who've had similar experiences in different cultures from a different perspective, and also have been shaped by those totally different experiences. And I can say, I am glad I belong to the Central Baptist Church in Marshall, Texas, and at the age of 12, and then again at 18, had profound experiences there that really shaped my vision of myself in the world. But I'm glad I'm not still there. I'm glad I'm not stuck there. I'm glad that after those experiences, I had the fortunate opportunity to move in a world that taught me also other things that I would not have had from those experiences. So I can value my experience as a Christian, and I value the Christian story and the inspiration it's given me, the grace that it's given me, the language that it's given me, the friends it has given me, the memories it has given me. Without saying, however, it's the only story that could have shaped the rest of the world. The young woman who asked me last night, the woman who asked me about the young woman who said, I'm saved. I should have said, I wish it later that I said to her, I understand what she's saying when she said, I'm saved. The question that then comes is, well, miss, does that mean I'm not? Does that mean that if I haven't had your experience in your particular skin, at your particular time, in your particular place, I'm not, quote, saved, whatever you mean by saved? If that's the case, I cannot believe in a God who would make available to us only one kind of revelation in one place at one time. Now, I know there are Christians who believe that, as probably there are Muslims who believe that there's only one way or others. But I value deeply my parents' influence over me. I loved my mother and father. But I'm glad I'm not only the creature of my mother and father, that I've had other influences from other people in my life who've enlarged my life beyond the capacity of my mother and father. And I feel the same way about my religious journey. So that's what I meant when I said I can be true to my story while also recognizing that other people's story has been true for them, and that there may be something in their stories that help me to understand my own myself better than I did otherwise.
Well, verifying to Harold's question, your response, last night you talked about how your ethics have been shaped by your experiences. You just kind of briefly touched upon it now. Do you feel that, I guess, your faith is a product of experience or of tradition?
It's truly mixed, and that is a good question. I was raised on the Ten Commandments, and I've broken my share of them. I won't disclose which ones, but I've broken my share of them. But I'm aware when I break them that I am in somehow going against the grain of the way an important body of opinion believes the world should be organized, and that it's actually better to live that way than to live contrary to that way. And so I'm shaped by the narrative, the story of Jesus, the teaching of Jesus. What struck me so much was I had a couple of pastors who seemed to be out of place and out of time, because they talked about how when Jesus lived, he embraced the outcast, he embraced women, the fallen woman, the prostitute, the tax collector even. I mean, the revolt against the IRS is not new in your time. Tax collectors always have been regarded with opprobrium. And here Jesus enlarged his circle by not just staying with the authorities and the powers and the elites. He really opened himself to life, to people who were struggling. So I've been shaped by that. All that I learned at Central Baptist Church had an influence on me. But as I've moved beyond Central Baptist Church and moved out into the world, I have been shaped by experience. I was saying at breakfast this morning, I don't think I've had more powerful spiritual experiences at any time in my life than when I have been in the grip of some unexpected music that deeply touched me. I had heart surgery 5 years ago. I was in intensive care for 3 years, for 3 months, and 3 weeks, and 3 days, and totally out of it. It seemed like 3 years. And I came up at midnight in my hospital room. No one was there. The nurse had gone for the moment. And she had left on the television set. The television set was Channel 13, which is our public television station in New York, which was repeating a performance, a live performance from Lincoln Center the previous Sunday, which I had actually seen before I went to the hospital, unexpectedly went to the hospital, of Beethoven's Fifth. And when I came up out of that anesthesia and that 3-day grave, you might say, and heard that music which had swelled through that room, I felt as deeply linked to some ultimate reality as I've ever felt in my life. And you know, the root word of religion is religio, to link, to connect to the deepest sources of our human experience and to ultimate reality. That was as powerful a religious experience as I ever had in church, although my experiences in that church, at the revival meetings and in the altar calls were very powerful too. So that experience of Beethoven's Fifth, when I was coming back from the edge of death, transformed me again. I mean, I don't believe in one size fits all, that one experience can shape the rest of your life. Life is a continuum of experiences. And I'm actually I've never taught publicly, even though I was studying for the ministry, have a master's degree, and have made religion my beat, one of my beats in journalism. I've never really given a structured lecture on faith. And a friend of mine, I'll have to back up, and not get too long, I know, but these are complicated issues. My lifelong friend, a friend who sat with me at a class like this and became my alter ego, my kindred soul. He died 3 years ago, and I was asked to do the eulogy. And I did. I worked hard on it. We had a marvelous ceremony. It was a transformation of loss and death and grief into a celebration of friendship and love and camaraderie. And I have another very close friend who's a profound atheist. And he was in that service. The music was right. The children spoke. My friend's children. He's my age. He's older than me. He was 70. It was just one of those rare experiences in life when you're linked. So this friend of mine who's the atheist, who runs a large institution in Texas, he wrote me and he said, look, there's a lecture that's been established in my name. Would you come and deliver the first lecture? I'd like you to talk about faith, because I felt so powerfully something at work there in the friendship that you shared with this man, that I'd like you to talk about it. So I agreed foolishly to do it. I mean, these are very difficult subjects to talk about. I intend to end that lecture by playing a wonderful concerto of Mozart's. I get the number right now, but it's the one that's in Amadeus in the beginning there. Because when I listen to that, when I hear that, I am transposed. It is as if God, the ultimate reality, or whatever one wants to call it, is speaking through that music to me. Not speaking, but connecting to me. Now, I don't expect any of the rest of you to have that experience. I'm just peculiar. I want to have your experience. I don't know what moves you or what will touch you over the next 40 some odd years. But that experience, the first time I heard that concerto, it changed me. It spoke to me. It summoned something from me. It connected to me. And that is as powerful an experience in my spiritual, perhaps not my theological, but my spiritual journey as That's what happened to me at age 12 at Central Baptist Church. So that's what I mean. Faith is what I tend to assent to. It's what I tend to say about what I believe. Experience is what really shapes me. And we have to give some kind of linguistic organization to our inchoate experiences in order to talk sensibly about them. I mean, I'm not sure I would talk this way outside of a trusting classroom like this. Because too many people wouldn't understand the context of it. But that's what I mean by faith is what I say about the experiences I've had. And since it's always ultimately impossible for any but the most gifted of us to express ourselves, it's always falling short of what I really have experienced. Yes.
I'm a musician. I'm very interested in the comments you just made, and I wanted to take that idea and basically make a challenge to you in regards to my opinion about music and why it could have the effect that you did is because of the interdependency and the fact that not only is everyone speaking the same language, but they're playing in tune, so they're making the step from going from just having the knowledge to having the knowledge of themselves in relationship to everyone else, and the interdependency that goes on and being able to identify as independent and as a whole. And I think if you look at American society and religion, how do you think we can create that type of harmony within our culture when we have religions like, say, the Southern Baptists who preach exclusion and are saying pretty much that they don't want to be in tune with what's going on because it's just their way or no way at all, and it seems like that's what's stopping our society from gaining that sense of harmony that you can experience through a concerto or something like that. I was wondering what your opinions were, whether
your question raises layers of issues, some of which I have to set aside. I mean, I'm not a musician. I don't know anything about the creation of music. I wish I were. I only know music as it affects me, as a receiver of the gift, not as the creator of the gift. So I really can't address that issue. Same way with poetry. I love poetry. I have a series on right now called The Power of Poetry, and a little book out called Fooling with Words about poetry. And I say in the introduction to that, I don't know anything about poetry except that it pleases me. The sounds of poetry are pleasing to me. So are the sounds of some music. And I don't know why that is, why it speaks to me, and it wouldn't speak to Doug. And I know nothing about the creation of music, so I have to move that off the agenda. The larger question, though, that you raise is a very profound one. Democracy is a very thin veneer of civility stretched across the wild passions of the human heart. I mean, we are a wild species. I sometimes am in awe of our ability as a democracy to keep a common rule, a common order, a common society. And it's always being pulled apart, not just by Southern Baptists. By the way, not all Southern Baptists believe that way. There are some wonderful Southern Baptists, including conservative Southern Baptists. I very much value their emphasis on family and their emphasis upon moral structure. I don't like those who want to coerce all of us into seeing the Bible their way or seeing society. But it's not just religion, although that was the subject of my talk last night, that threatens to undermine that thin veneer of civility. I mean, look at capitalism. The whole notion behind capitalism is that it will serve only the bottom line, irrespective of an individual's need, irrespective of a community's need. So a major company will just decide, because it's in the interest of their profits, to move to Mexico. And the disruption of it in the life of a community, the taxes that are lost for the schools that have been built, the families that are torn loose from their roots and have to move to keep up with the job. Capitalism is unchecked, unfettered. Capitalism is itself an anti-society phenomenon, because it exists in and for itself, and by its own logic of the producing profits. So it too is a threat to the perceived order by which we all need to live by some common rules. I mean, it's not a religious issue that requires, it's not only a religious issue that requires a compromise. in a democracy. It's just a necessity of living so that we don't have to worry when we approach a stop sign. Now that's by the way, I was in Houston recently, and I was reading every day that I was there about a fascinating story. There's a suburb north of Houston, the Woodlands, very affluent, very libertarian. It's conservative Republicans who live in the suburbs who just don't want government having anything to do with their lives. Now, there are 9 members on the town council. They're all Republicans. But a large conservative libertarian organization of 1,700 members wants to throw the 9-member council out because they have voted to install stop signs in the curving streets of this suburb. Why? Because they don't want any coercion. They don't want any authority beyond themselves to govern their lives. But that is absolutely ridiculous. The stop sign is an indication of trust. If I pull up to that stop sign and there's one on the other side, and I know I'm going to stop, I'm going to assume the next person is going to stop. Discipline, that kind of order, that kind of self-legitimated coercion. I will give up my right to drive through the intersection without paying heed to the stop sign if you give up your right. It's absolutely essential to the maintenance of a life in which we can survive, not to mention flourish. So there are threats to this democracy that come from a lot of sources of religion. As I said last night, we have to address this issue. That unbridled enthusiasm for my own faith leads me to want to require you to believe as I believe. And we have to govern our religious enthusiasm. But the same is true in every other area of life as well. Otherwise, we will have a jungle of unbridled individualism. And we will not be able to bring our children up in a society where certain things can be anticipated and expected because we have agreed upon some general rules of behavior. So there are threats to religion. Yes.
The last book that we discussed in this class was Ron Siemens, Religion and Public Life. And in that book, he sets out a series of guidelines to use in judging whether or not religious language is appropriate for public discussion. I was wondering if, with all the times you've encountered religion being used for public discussion, if you've formed your own set of guidelines as to what constitutes appropriate use of religious language and what doesn't.
I haven't, but I think if I did, I'd probably come out where Ron came out. No, I haven't, but I couldn't really add to his. I don't remember exactly his list, but I thought it was. I like his book very much. It's helped me, and so I think I'd come out just about where he came out.
Sounds like you do de facto anyway. You talk about mutual respect.
Yeah.
Presenting your arguments will be public accessibility, and the moral integrity is about living out our commitments. Make our words line with our actions, and our words lining up with other words, depending on the audience we're talking to. So I think you do very much a parallel approach.
With Ron. By the way, there's an interesting book that I think you all would find interesting, even though it's not of your time. John F. Kennedy collaborated in the writing of a book called Profiles of Courage when he was a United States Senator. And the examples, the case studies he uses there are of people of politicians who accepted the necessity of compromise in order to make something happen. It's a very good lesson. Those individual profiles in courage are not necessarily of people who did extraordinary things, but of people who were willing to collaborate and to compromise, which is, I think, the essence of a democratic society. If all of us were religious fundamentalists, we probably could live with Pat Robertson as president. Although that might be hard too. But we're not, so we have to compromise. And he has to compromise, and he hasn't been willing to compromise. That's the problem.
Justin, and then I know you've had some questions for the class, like last night you were asking about where interest in moral values and religious values come, so I want to give you a chance to do that too.
I appreciate what you said to my first question about how to interpret the Bible or how to reconcile different interpretations of the Bible. But then I was thinking about it, and my question then is, how do you tell what's universal and what's cultural? Because it seems to me that a lot of things can be culturally defined. For example, justice, which you said is universal. Couldn't you argue that another culture has a completely different conception of justice, of equality? We have, in our culture, a conception of equality, but what about the Talmud regime, the very fundamental Islamic regime that is oppressing women in radical ways? I guess I ask these questions like someone who's searching and trying to always revise or check myself. What about God? Is God universal, or is he culturally defined? Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha.
Well, there are mixed questions there. Each separated is a good question. I mean, it's not too hard to figure out what's universal. It's better to love than to hate. We all respond almost the same way to love, and we almost always respond each other's to hate. And we fear it. We're intimidated by it. We're scared by it. Love, we're encouraged by it. We're made to feel good by it. Justice means that I don't get treated more disadvantageously than you by the state. We all respond to that. None of us we want to live in a police state, whether it's a religious police state like the Taliban. I mean, I can pretty well measure, I can prove a comment on their sense of justice by saying it seems to come at a very high price to people who disagree with them. That doesn't seem to be just. What's fair? You go right on. There's certain universals. When Jesus talks about love, he's using much the same language as Buddha, much the same language in his best moments as Muhammad. All of the great religions speak of love as a universal element in our need, in our appetite. So that's not too hard to figure out one of the universals. The notion of God is a different issue, it seems to me, because I don't know how you would ever arrive at an idea of God that was cultural, not culturally influenced. So that's why it calls for, as I said last night, for humility. When you use the name God, not pride, not in saying I know who God is or what God is. I can say I've been experienced with God without saying it's the experience you're going to have. It's when we become arbitrary and absolute about anything that we tend to lose our perspective and lose our humanity, I think. I did have a question, and that is, why are you in this class? What is it that brings you to this? You have options. You don't have to be here. Why do you choose to be here? Mary?
Actually, it was kind of, my father started laughing because he was asking me what classes I was taking. And when I said leadership and religious values, he said, isn't that an oxymoron? And my father was a politician, so I guess I can say that. But I just think it's interesting to find out, or to look at and to read case studies and to see people's opinions on how leaders use their religious values and how they use their moral convictions and what they can say is humanistic and what they can say is religious. How people can use different things to influence them and what other people's opinions are on that.
I asked the question because the cliche in the mass media is that your generation is driven primarily by the pursuit of individual success and wealth, and that this generation is disinterested in or indifferent to idealism, moral values. And I don't find that to be the case as I travel the country. I find so many examples of activism, idealism on college campuses right now, but among this very effective student movement on doing something about exploitation of labor by Nike and other American multinational companies. That's been largely driven by students like yourselves. And I just simply don't find that reality as I see it, as I travel as a journalist, fitting the stereotype of your generation that is drawn by the big the big things, by the big, the media at least. And so it's interesting to me that you would choose a class where you're wrestling with these moral issues instead of being in a class, and maybe you're in that class too, of principles of management and investments and that sort of thing. So the questions you're dealing with in this class relevant to the world you live in? Or is it just reserved for this class?
I think
Okay.
definitely,
They are.
and I think when we bring in the articles, it makes it very applicable. I think each of us thinks about how this is going to come into play, not just now, but in the future.
Their last round of papers was on how this course may have influenced how they would lead in their own situation as a leader in a company or in a political situation or in media or in university life. And we'll have those papers back for you on Tuesday.
He's going to let me grade this.
Thanks, I'm just glad. Wonderful reflections on how the concepts of mutual respect or pluralism actually have moved people's ideas about how those values would operate. Yes.
I was just going to say that I think this class is unique in the sense that it lets you take a look at yourself and what your beliefs are. And I think that anytime there's a class or anything that sort of forces you to do that, I think it's a productive thing. And I think that in a classroom setting like this, especially with the group of people we have, it's really interesting. Like I come out of this class sometimes, people will say something that I just completely never thought of, and it'll just make me think, which is a challenging thing to do.
My father, my late father, one of his favorite stories was of the two brothers who owned a butcher shop in Marshall, Texas. And one day, neither of them was a believer. One day, an evangelist came to town. I know you all are not familiar with revivals the way they used to be in the South when I was growing up. But an evangelist came to town, and Charlie, the older brother, went out to hear the evangelist and was converted. He got religion. So he came back and started working on his younger brother, Lester. Lester, you got to get religion too. You got to go out and hear Eddie Nicholson, who was the evangelist. You got to get saved. This went on for the revival lasted 2 weeks. This went on day after day. Charlie would go out here, the preacher would come back and say, you got to get religion too. Finally, Lester put it into him by saying, listen, Lester, if I get religion, who will weigh the meat? And the notion of separating your religious faith from your business decisions was the question that my father wrestled with. And so there are a lot of people who do believe, okay, you come to a class like this and you talk about religion and morality, and you go out and do what you have to do in the world. And the effort to link them, I think, is always a difficult task, to be both religious and give a fair price, put a fair price on the meat.
President Carter said it's easier to be moral, and that there are more moral examples in politics today than there are in some of the congregations he knows. You care to speculate on the moral caliber of folks in debate deliberations in politics versus religious work?
I've been around politicians all of my life, both as a participant in the 60s campaign. I worked for John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and I worked for Kennedy in the Peace Corps, and I worked for Johnson for 4 years, and I've covered politics through the years since then. I don't think politicians are more or less corrupt than we are, more or less flawed, more or less frail. They are caught in the tension of give and take that often requires them to make compromises that are not, that the rest of us don't have to make. All of us in our real life situations are always making compromises. I've found more scoundrels, as many scoundrels in religion as I've found in politics, and as many idealists in politics as I've found in religion. Jimmy Carter was an interesting case study. He was the first politician, Southern politician, to talk so openly on a national forum about his born-again faith. And he started talking about having been a born-again Christian. And people where I live in New York, New England, they just had no idea of what he was talking about. So I did a documentary for CBS. At the time, I was chief correspondent for CBS Reports, which is their documentary unit, was the documentary unit, about born again. And as I said last night, it was very hard to explain. It wasn't a very good documentary because the experience is both culturally, linguistically, and individualistically parochial or private, and it's very hard to explain what it meant. But he talked about it openly talked about his faith, and it both helped him get elected by delivering the evangelical vote in the South to him, although they turned against him by 1980. And it hurt him up north and among liberals who didn't understand that talk, or non-Southerners who didn't understand that talk. But he did try to live in the real world. I'm sure that his work on the peace process in the Middle East was driven by his religious convictions, but his religious convictions also cost him some moments. He was a far more effective Christian than he was an effective president. And that's often the trade-off. He would have made a far better missionary than he did president. A human missionary, somebody who goes out and lives his faith in the world, drawing people their race. What he's done after being president is a quite striking example of a dedicated and disciplined life. Here's Gerald Ford, whom I like personally as a politician and as a man, but it's been his whole post-presidency playing golf. Here's Jimmy Carter, spending his whole post-presidency trying to make a difference in the world for people who need it. It's an interesting, complex man, but every man, and eventually every woman who becomes president, will be a very complicated and complex person. You do not rise to the top of our political order without both appreciating and responding to the complexity of our democratic society.
Mr. Moyers, we live in the mundane world where time runs out on us. We thank you for making a difference and for enriching our lives.
I live in a mundane world too, and I get 56 minutes in an hour of television, and I have to stop when the red light goes off. But I'll just close with this interesting use of the word mundane. The word mundane comes from the Latin word mundo, world, meaning